Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Have your attention, please. All quiet, please. Thank you. Go ahead and have your notes out. We're going to continue on with the United States Constitution, civil rights, in particular, the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, looking at what forms of discrimination are allowable and what kinds of remedies can take place. I'm going to go through all of that and so forth. I'm looking at this as like, oh my gosh, we just got so much stuff to do, and there's just so many important things to do, but we have to be out of here in early June. And in fact, I'm guessing with you guys, since this is an A-day, right? Yes? And this is an afternoon class. That last week of school, we have 4 days, and the first 2 days are full days, right? And you have exams on A-day, third period and fourth period. So I don't know why you have third period, but you'll have an exam there, and then you'll have your exam in my class. And then that's it. The next day you come back for a full B day, do your exams in third and fourth period. The next day, on the Wednesday, the 9th, you'll come in and do first and second period A day. And then the next day, the last day of the semester, year, you'll do first and second period exams for B day. So actually, you're going to have exam on a day of the week. And I was trying to think of this, like throughout the school year. We have actually not had a regular like school day on a Monday, have we? Well, you're going to have a school day on June 7th on a Monday, and I will give you a test on that. My goal is to actually get a test on the civil rights unit. There's a lot of stuff in there, and then we'll just kind of see how it plays out. Okay? We're going to learn you up full on, beginning to the end, all the way, each period that I spend with you guys. Does that sound good? Is that a deal? Yep, that's a deal. Okay, so, and actually it's interesting because like normal circumstances, I got all these different video clips and so forth, but I don't know if I've got enough time to play all the different video clips because that would just be, I don't know, that would just take so much time and so forth. Oh, and by the way, you know my clicker died. Did I tell you that? And I ordered one, and it's not going to get here until Friday. So I'm going to be like standing back here sometimes, but nevertheless, here we go. Write this down. What?
You want to click a person?
No, but that's okay. Because when I click, I'm going to select. I click, and then I click that way, and I click that way. And somebody in the other class actually was like, gave me a remote mouse, but it only went in one direction easily. So that didn't work.
Are you sure I'm 100% comfortable sitting in the good?
I'm not comfortable with that. I'm not even like zero. Just kidding. No. No, I'm going to go back and forth and back and forth. I can do that. You ready? So here we go. This is actually a trick question. Okay? Is it, according to the United States Supreme Court, okay, now that I told you it's a trick question, you're going to be like, oh, wait, what is the answer? Is it constitutional for the government to discriminate on the basis of race, color of the skin? No? Wait. It means, yes, they can. But only under what circumstance? Raise your hand. Scrutiny. Very good. Now, strict scrutiny. The only time that the government can discriminate on the basis of things that are really immutable, and you're like, immutable? Well, that's a weird word. Unchangeable. Okay, now Michael Jackson did change his skin color to be a much lighter skin tone, over the years and so forth. But nevertheless, this is something that the Supreme Court said, look, you have to have a compelling governmental interest in order to treat people of different races differently. Okay? So in other words, they threw out the whole separate but equal nonsense that came around in the latter part of the 1800s. Remember they used to say it was okay to have black schools and white schools as long as they're equal, whatever. Raise your hand if you can tell me on what basis did the Supreme Court say, no, in the Brown versus Board of Education case, we're not going to think this is okay. Yeah, how does the Zoll test relate to that? Yes, go ahead.
The black children were seeing themselves as lesser because of the
Yeah,
separation.
so it was like society was telling them this, the government was telling them this, and so forth, which is really interesting because I was having some thoughts about what is the value of people going around and telling you that you suck, okay? You know, I mean, hey, be nice. He owes you an apology later on, I think, yeah. Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, it's an interesting thing because it's like, we don't want the government to do that. In fact, write a little note on this. I was mentioning this to the other class. One of the things that actually took place in the 1960s as a social movement among the African American community was Black is beautiful. There was a real focus on Black is beautiful. It's kind of like, okay, we are going to own differences, cultural differences, heritage differences, and so forth. And instead of like trying to look and appear all, European, white, whatever, just, you got a different hairstyle, make it look good. You got a different this, you got a different that. Black is beautiful, don't be ashamed of that. Because that was one of the things that was coming across in communities that had a very, very racist and hierarchical structure. In other words, the whites were in the top of the situation, the blacks were in the bottom, and they were told that you basically suck. Right? I mean, that was a pretty difficult thing to watch, wasn't it? With little kids, like, choosing the dolls. I remember when my kids were little, my daughter, she picked out a doll, and in the toy store, they had all these different things, they had a whole bunch of different arrangement. What color doll did she pick out? Besides pink,
White.
She didn't. Yeah, it wasn't. No, I mean, they had like a gradient. It was kind of like, I don't know, like the one I put in my the cover of the book that I wrote. A little bit darker than that. Yeah. I don't know. But it was kind of like, did it matter? No. All right, now, Caden. Okay. Yeah. Caden's not going to be like, I'm not going to choose this doll because everyone says that these people are horrible and I'm not going to be like them. Okay. All right, now, okay, here we go. Now, let's get into this. I want to get into this quick because we're going to get into like discrimination with respect to gender. Okay, but let's wrap up and this is, oh yeah, that's, to the discrimination based on gender. You're really going to have to like hold yourselves because I'm like, my antennae are like really sensitive to that because twice in my history of teaching in government, talking about the gender differences with respect to discrimination and so forth. I got a better handle of my classrooms now, but I learned the hard way. Because twice, stupid people, both times they were guys, not that women can't say stupid things too. Okay, MK's like, whoa. Oh, but wait for it. Both times, some guy made some ill-conceived statement relative to gender differences, and it was pretty rude. But in both instances, the female showed, yeah, I told you this right, showed lack of constraint or restraint and so forth and figured that she wanted to deal with it right now. Oh, that bothers me. It's okay. Sorry. I know, it's just a me thing. And she got up and she punched the guy in the face. You know? But I can't have that. So in other words, so if you feel like you have to say something, don't say it. And if you feel like you still have to say it, just make sure that you exit the class quickly at the end of the class. But not in class. Yeah. Okay. All right. So here we go. Shh. Step quiet, please. All right. Write this down. Okay, because I want to wrap this up. This is us. And this one's a little bit more complicated. This is actually a little bit more controversial. And frankly, I thought we had actually started to reach a point where we were getting things were getting better, but I don't know. The discussion is ongoing in our country. Write this down. After we had the Brown versus Board of Education case and the government was no longer separating, in any part of the country, separating whites and blacks in schools, some people were looking and going, is there anything we can do as a people, as through our government, to help out two situations? One, people who've already been harmed by the discrimination. That one's easy to identify. If you were in a substandard, segregated school, your education wasn't going to be as good, was it? And that's going to impact you throughout your life, as far as job opportunities and various different things. Okay, so one goal was to help out those people. okay? Through either like educational remediation or maybe some kind of a thing to sort of help them get a little bit further in the employment world. You understand? All of this is going to be referred to, make sure you have this in your notes, as affirmative action programs. The government giving some help to groups, and they applied not only to African Americans, but you can talk about like Native Americans, women. As you look over history, women have been denied various different opportunities and so forth. I'd say it's a lot better now. You know, for example, if you look at like college attendance, females outnumber guys in colleges. And of course, you're like, oh, well, you know, what difference does that make? You know, maybe guys choose more to go into fields that don't require college education and so forth. But nevertheless, some affirmative action programs are set up to help advance females. Now, here's the other part. Write this down. And this is the trickier part. And this is the part that's very much in discussion among Americans today. And that is, okay, you can't have overt racism. And if you're an employer going, you need not apply if your skin is darker than this tone. I'm like, you can't do that. You can't do that. I mean, there's all kinds of things. You're not going to get government contracts. You're not, I mean, you can be like, well, you can be your own little private association and so forth. But as far as like interacting with the economy and so forth, you just can't do that. You can't be overtly racist in your employment hiring or advancement within your employment. Does that make sense? And yet, the concern is that some of that racism was just being sort of covered over, but it was still sort of kind of taking place. And so affirmative action programs were trying to deal with that situation. I'll give you an example. Texaco. Texaco, large corporation, I want to say maybe 10 or 20 years ago or so, there was a lawsuit brought against Texaco on behalf of African Americans. And the claim was that Texaco was not advancing African American employees within the company. And you're like, well, how do you prove that? Did any Texaco executives like say right out, hey, African American, we're not going to promote you within the company? I mean, that would be just like ridiculous, right? So how that was the attempt to prove that there was actually discrimination going on in that company, that big oil company, was to show the numbers. Here are the numbers of employees, lots of employees. You know, you got a relatively, you know, grounded base percentage of African Americans in the lower ranks. But when you got to the upper ranks, there were very few African Americans in the upper ranks. So you're like, well, that must be because of discrimination. Texaco's response was, no, those are choices and abilities and this and that and so forth. I mean, it's kind of like, if there is not about 50% men in the nursing profession, does that mean that there's discrimination? Or is that a result of choices? Yeah. If there is not 50% of men in, like, you know, elementary teacher employment positions, does that show discrimination, or does it just show different choices and so forth? You know what I'm saying? But this, here we go. Final word on the Texaco case. There was a smoking gun. You're like, smoking gun. There's a gun that's smoking. Guns don't smoke. There was a smoking gun. There was apparently a piece of evidence that was contained that was I want to say it was either a recording or some kind of a memo within Texaco that showed there was an attempt to prevent African Americans from being promoted within the ranks. Oh, rude, yeah. And how, like, once that came to light, Texaco was like, yeah, we lost this lawsuit. We lost this lawsuit. So they were, like, doing all kinds of various different things to make amends because they've been trying to kind of keep it all concealed. So that's the point. Will we, please, ever in this country be able to get to a point where Dr. Martin Luther King said, where there's good like color blindness, where it doesn't matter what the color of the skin is and so forth. What matters is integrity and merit and all those kinds of various different things. I hope so, but it's still an issue. So here's the deal. Write this down. How do you set up, if you want to, because you don't have to set up an affirmative action program if you're the government. Some governments have set them up and then later taken them down, saying, we don't need it as much because there's not as much. leftover racism going on under the covers, or there's not as many people who were directly impacted by terrible segregated schools that existed all the way up until, the 1950s and 60s. You understand that? So that's where, how can you do it without being racist and discriminatory to the more benefited group, I guess is what you can call it. You have to be careful with that. Here's the Bakke decision. 1976. Write this down. You can feel for this because if you're trying to move ahead. Alan Bakke wanted to become a doctor. Okay, anybody know people that are wanting to become doctors or that are doctors? There you go. There's only so many spots available in medical school. You can't just go, oh, I'm a doctor. I skipped the medical school. It's just kind of a waste of time and really expensive. Oh, but I'm a doctor. No, you have to go through medical school in order to be certified as a doctor in a state. And you can't practice medicine without being board certified. You understand that? And there's only so many spots in the medical school. It's very, very competitive. I think the only thing that's more competitive is like veterinary school, because you have to know like a lot of different species instead of just one. Yeah. Yeah. So, Alan Bakke, write this down. He was trying to get into medical school year after year, several different years. And he ran into a problem because he wasn't the most well qualified, because he would have gotten in right away if he was the most well qualified. But he was, as it turns out, more qualified than some of the people who were being admitted to medical school. Because the medical school in California, they had an affirmative action program. They were trying to help increase the number of minorities within the medical profession. So they had set aside some specific spots in medical school for African Americans, and I think there was a couple of other categories. Do you understand that? So in other words, he was competing for which spots? The white spots. Okay? But his qualifications were better than some of the ones who were getting in on some of the, like the African American spots. And he says, that's not fair. In fact, you can write this down. He would say, you call it affirmative action, I call it reverse discrimination. Reverse discrimination. What test is the Supreme Court going to look at when the government has a program that takes into account somebody's race? Lemon test has to do with religion and so forth. No. It's the same test that was announced in the Brown versus Board of Education case. Very good, strict scrutiny. So strict scrutiny applies in a situation now where those who are being discriminated against, arguably in this case, would be white people. Okay? The Supreme Court ruled in his favor. Write this down. They ruled in his favor. And it was very interesting. It's a bit vague, and sometimes when you look at a Supreme Court case, you're like, I'm not really quite sure if I get a really clear picture of what's okay and what's not okay. That's why I like this Time magazine cover where it says, yes and no. The specific program, no, this is Alan Bakke. I don't know. Shh, please. Lizzie. Tangents. Okay. Shh. So, here's the deal. No, it's not. Here's the deal. Here's the takeaway. You can't have a strict quota system where you set aside a certain number of spots for a particular race or somebody or a group that you're trying to help out with the affirmative action. You understand that? So that's why it says quite clearly, no quotas. But can it still be taken into account among a number of other various factors? Yes. So basically the message was, if you're going to do an affirmative action program, you need to be careful on how you set that up. Okay? What about it? Is it still worth doing that today? We'll take a couple of opinions. Is it still worth having programs in effect that give some credence to someone's national status, racial status, and so forth in determining admission to college, scholarships, employment? Is it still worth it? What do you think?
I'm sorry, I'm
You have your pencil up. That's an indication that you wanted to be called on.
I was looking forward.
Do you have an answer?
Yes. Affirmative action has been seen to actually negatively affect the people that they're trying to.
So should we still have it?
Can I give reason?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for not interrupting me.
Thank you.
Because they'll go into schools that they're not qualified for, but they'll be accepted because of affirmative action, then they'll drop out because, once again, not qualified for it, which would end up giving them
I wouldn't say that necessarily. I think they can do it. It's just that, like, if you're in a medical school, I mean, there's a lot of resources that are going in per student. It's not kind of like, all of a sudden they're like, oh, we have to add 5 or 6 more people into the class. Oh, no. There's only so many spots. Okay? There's only so many spots. So they might not be as well qualified. They're not necessarily going to drop out. But go ahead.
I was talking about a study. I was talking about specific cases. What I'm saying is they are more likely to drop out. Who's that? The people who are let into schools because of affirmative action and not because they are 100% qualified. Also, they're less likely to connect with peers after college because into a gap, which increases the chances of dropping out.
This is an interesting question because if you are admitted in and so forth, sometimes if there is an affirmative action program, sometimes people might make a wrong mistake and think, oh, you got in here just because of your special circumstance, because you are a female, because you are an African American, because you are a Native American, and so forth, when in fact, maybe you could have gotten in if there was no affirmative action program. I see your point, okay? So you don't want people to think that and so forth, but nevertheless, even if somebody thinks you can't do it, and you can do it, they'd be like, well, that's just their problem.
In your case, my sister, she was eligible to get I believe, I haven't talked to her about it, but she was denied a speaking spot in a certain graduation thing because the other person that was with her, from what she was giving me, was taught they have certain minority status, and so they were eligible.
So she didn't like that.
Yeah, she was not
Yeah.
very happy.
Yeah.
She has, even though I wasn't able to look at the research myself, but
She felt like she was discriminated against
not because she was a woman, but because they had.
because of the racial status, minority status. Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
I don't understand this at all, because the whole point is that we're not supposed to see rape, but then you use it to get ahead. Like, that doesn't make sense.
It's a difficult thing. It's kind of like, so hold on, Lizzie. It's a difficult thing, okay? Wait until you call me. It's a difficult thing because if you're trying to move people forward who have been either held back because of prior decisions or because of an incipient discrimination that's going on in the society, it's difficult because here you got people saying, don't look at these criteria, and yet in order to help people along, particular programs are set up to look at those criteria. You ready? Go.
They're backwards, and then instead of being like equilibrium where everyone has a equal chance, it's like we're gonna make it discriminated ain't opposite way.
Yeah, it's just like makeup.
Here, I'm going to do, go ahead, Victoria.
I guess what I'm trying to say is that it's a difference between equality and equity. So it's like, if there was equality then everyone would have the same chance, because equity is giving people a better opportunity because they come out of this school.
And this is an interesting point because they're talking about this a lot in society in America today. Equality of opportunity, give everyone the equal opportunity, and so forth, as opposed to equity, which is kind of like maybe how that admissions thing was set up. We are going to create equity as in a representative number of whites, blacks, men, women, and make that all, even though that might diminish some people's opportunity based on their characterizations. Oh, I tell you what, I think this thing has percolated up a lot more than when I was even teaching this 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. Let me do a quick survey from you. By show of hands, how many of you would say that there is still a continued need for, and it's good to have some kind of affirmative action programs out there? 1, 2. Maybe 2.5, 3. We get 4 or 5. How many of you guys are like, let's move past the affirmative action programs and just have so-called level playing field based on, okay? And this is what I've been hearing a lot from North Star classes, Capitol High School classes. But I tell you what, this is a hot debate going on in society today. And you go to a workplace, you go to a college and so forth, and you will engage in some discussion with people that have various different points of view. Final word, and then we'll move on to...
I was just gonna ask you if I could ask Daphne, like, I just wanna know.
for what?
Because she agreed to affirmative, I just wanna know, like, what your thought process is.
I don't know, I just feel like if you are at a disadvantage, like there are some people who literally doing for, yeah, they don't like no other, like almost no other than you don't like have it.
Okay, shh, let her finish, let her finish.
I feel like they should be given some extra advantages, whether that's like extra materials later in life, or that's like just the extra support that they need to get through.
And that's a good point. I'm going to...
That other people could easily get to
Yeah.
without being in their circumstances.
I'm going to jump into that because that's one of the things that in education and so forth they've been trying to deal with. It's not so much like a race-based or gender-based or minority-based and so forth. It's more of an economic base, as in if you live, and there are some parts of the country, if you live in a nice, wealthy neighborhood and so forth, the public education opportunities you're going to get, or even private education if your parents pay for it, can really open up a lot of doors for you, and that's a difficulty with people who are from lower income status. And so you try, sometimes what they're trying to do is create some opportunities to remediate, give additional opportunity, but it's tough. I mean, it can be very hard to make it out of low income status and so forth to be able to compete with people who have gotten a better, richer educational opportunity. You guys have got all kinds of opinions here, there, and then over here.
Right, I think we all agree that like average set of things are usually going to last longer than okay, right? So doing a further action between like college, not just people that
Interesting point. I'm going to jump in on this one. There was I was reading the news. They've got like a magnet school within, I want to say like the San Francisco school district. So you have to qualify based on merit. I think it's like a high school. And as it turns out, families, like Ben was talking about, families that really stress education and put a lot of emphasis on it from an early stage and so forth, those kids are coming through, maybe with like helicopter parents and so forth. Really, like, how many of you guys have got helicopter parents who are like really like aware of what your grades are and how you're doing and so forth? The interesting thing was in that community, the demographic breakdown of the kids in that magnet school was close to 50% Asian American. And the demographics of that entire school district, the Asian American population was maybe, I don't know, like a quarter. So in other words, they were qualifying to get into that. And I think the school district was looking at that going, no, actually we want more equity. And so they were setting aside and saying, we're going to take into account other factors besides strictly merit in order to get more African American kids in that school, which meant what's going to happen to the number of Asian American kids that are getting into that school? Not as well. And so sometimes on the discrimination part, sometimes you'll get certain communities like Asian American communities, depending on which group you're looking at and so forth, they've been doing pretty darn well in American society and education and so forth, and they don't necessarily like some of the ideas behind affirmative action type programs. You understand what I'm saying? Yeah, okay, Victoria, you were next.
So, I would do that. I kind of get into like something that I know that everyone added to the and more help because like if you think about it, that person who does more scholarship, like someone who can probably afford college and like one that they have to do later without it. Even though it sucks for them because like, you know, debt sucks. But if there's someone who does not have that kind of money, you need more help. My second thing is I think it's like you guys have done it asking, but it depends on what job it is essentially. So like if you look at, so like let's take nursing for example, it's like I think we all kind of know that there's a lot of women in that field, right? So what if there's a friend of asking for like, oh, if men are in that field, you can't ask for
Now, are men not in that field because they've been discriminated against or because they just didn't choose to go into it? That's an interesting question to look at.
So if we have
It does. It varies. It varies very much. And the Supreme Court, I mean, they've handled a number of different cases. This one kind of shocked people because it was the first time that they basically said, oh, wow, reverse discrimination. We're going to say, the whites win in this particular case under these particular fact circumstances. So it's kind of interesting to see. This isn't just strictly a Supreme Court decision. A lot of this is up to y'all, the voting public, as to what things are going to be set up justifiably one way or another. Yes?
Yeah, I was, the thing that she was talking about, right, it's not based on race that you were talking about, it's, which is what affirmative action is based on. It's
Can be. Could be based on a number of criteria.
number of criteria, that's what he said. Sorry, yeah, economic stats, there are plenty of, scholarships that help with economic stats. On the job gave on top of that. If
Be
you're the
nice.
first person in your family to go to college, there's an average for 1,000. No, it's not 1,000. Okay, the colleges that I was looking at are giving you a lot of money if you're the first person to go to college in your family for scholarship.
Yeah. Here's one thing that's kicking around, and I'm going to kind of end it at this, and so we can move on to some really interesting stuff. There's been some discussion about whether or not to have college loans paid off. President Biden, among others, has talked about reducing student debt and so forth. One argument against that is what kinds of people accumulate the largest amount of student debt while they're in post-high school education? Yeah, people are becoming doctors and lawyers, and people go into really expensive colleges and so forth. And so in that sense, if you eliminated all of that debt, who would receive perhaps some of the biggest benefit? The same wealthy people and so forth. Yeah, so interesting thing. It's an interesting dynamic on that. Oy, 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 oy. Yeah, this one gets people going. Let's get into gender discrimination. All right, here we go. All right, ladies and gentlemen, write this down. Once upon a time, in our country, women couldn't vote. You're like, wow, I knew that. Write that down. Once upon a time, women couldn't vote. Okay? Careful. Because some people have already announced that whether they're not going to do it here because I'm going to intervene. Yeah. So, women couldn't vote. Here's another thing. If you go back far enough in the United States of America, there were some places where women couldn't hold property. I mean, they were really dependent upon male members of their family in order to have financial sustenance. You understand that? In my lifetime, write this down. In my lifetime, once upon a time, it was a defense in a criminal case for a man charged with rape. He could say, I cannot be charged with rape because the female who allegedly was raped was his wife. In other words, they actually had that in the law at places in this country where a man could say basically to his wife, the only answer you can give is yes, because any other response means nothing. You understand that? That is not the case now. In fact, I want to say that was in the late 70s, maybe in the 80s, that the courts basically said, no, that's no defense. A female does have the right to control what happens with respect to her body and that kind of situation. Do you understand that? What amendment got rid of, once and for all, the prohibition on women voting? The 19th Amendment. Now, put this down. There were other kinds of various different things that were going on. Big, huge debate as far as the role of men and women in society. Did women, you'll see this next year when we talk about World War I, World War II. Did women fight for the United States? In neither one of those. They were not given the opportunity. Okay? Did they contribute? Oh, heck yeah. Oh, heck yeah. Because men, even economically, just looking at that simple measure, men were off fighting the war. And so they were not in the factories and so forth doing all the really critical industrial work to build the war material to fight the war. Women were coming in to the factories in World War I and World War II. They were serving in nursing positions. They were serving. I got a student, a junior right now, doing their history IA on women in the Army Air Corps. They weren't given an opportunity to fly in combat, but there weren't enough men to go around to fly the planes from the United States over to Europe and thereabouts in order to carry it out, so they were given that responsibility as well. Okay? As we move into the 1970s, it gets very interesting. We're going to talk about the Reed versus Reed case, which was decided in 1971. Write this down. 1971. There's a series of cases that are making their way through the courts about laws that discriminate on the basis of gender. Okay? And there was one particular law, and it's almost like this was just a perfect case made to say, you can't do that. Here we go. It came out of Idaho. Here are the facts. Yeah. This. Do you see the picture right here? Sally Reed lived here. It's in Boise, Idaho. It's outside of a house, I'm going to say in the north end. Sally Reed was married to Mr. Reed. I don't know what his name was, but his last name was Reed. They had one child. Here are the facts. Okay. They were divorced. They eventually got divorced. The son grew up into young adulthood and sadly took his own life. Okay? So, here we go. Where you have a death, where does the property go? Well, now the guy didn't have much property, but most of you guys know this. Oh, raise your hand, tell me. What document, if you have written one out, will determine where your stuff goes when you die? Yes? A will, very good. He did not have a will. Write that down. He didn't have a will. A will, a piece of paper that says, if I die, so-and-so gets my stuff. Thank you. Yes. Yes, go. So, here is what happens then. All states have these rules, laws in place. If someone dies without a will, then the following takes place. Okay, you ready? So typically, most states will have, like, if one spouse dies, the other spouse will receive the property. If there's no will, do you understand that? Goes to the surviving spouse. Okay? If there's no surviving spouse, then figure it out. The kids, yeah, kids. It'll go equally to the number of kids and so forth that are there. Okay? Now, here is what the law was in Idaho. Obviously, this young man didn't have, I'm just saying, he didn't have a spouse, he didn't have kids. Then it would go to, no, not the state. Actually, if there's no living relatives and so forth, you're right. It would go to the state. Wow. Wow. It wouldn't go, in the law of Idaho, it did not say to his parents. It said to his father. Okay? Do you understand that? That was the way the law was written. And I want to say, the law was, done back in the, 1800s, late 1800s or something like that. And everyone looked and was like, whatever, it's there and so forth. The mom wasn't too happy about that. Sally Reed, she's distraught over the whole thing and so forth. And she's like, wow, the only thing that I have left that is in existence of my sons is all going to the father. And she thought that was just totally unfair. The way it was written, it should have been like equitable, like splitting and so forth. So she said, that's got to be wrong. She had an attorney, a local attorney, who is since deceased, but when I was in the law, he had quite a varied practice. His name is Alan Durr. He's right here. He's a little bit older there. And I remember he was on the opposite side once or twice on criminal misdemeanor cases and so forth, because I was a young Ada County deputy prosecutor and a local attorney. He took her case, okay? He's like, we're going to challenge this. We're going to challenge the law. We're going to challenge the law of Idaho saying it's unconstitutional. Let me see. Was there any case, any part of the Constitution that might say that it would be not fair to treat one person on the basis of something they can't really change versus another one? 14th Amendment, yeah. So they made a 14th Amendment case. Now, Alan Durr didn't have privileges granted by the United States Supreme Court to take it all the way to the court. You remember how this works. You file your case in, I want to say, like Idaho District Court. It appeals up. I can't remember if they went through the Idaho court system or they went through the federal court system, but eventually, ding, 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 the case is accepted for argument in front of the United States Supreme Court. And guess who the attorney is that's going to give the oral arguments on behalf of Alan Durr's client, Sally Reed? No, not me. Ruth Bader Ginsburg. You're like, Mr. Hanson or RBG? I can't tell. Which one is that? You know, I don't do push-ups quite the way that she did. Anyway, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, this is like one of her big, big cases. If you watch any of the movies, documentaries, and so forth, this is one of the ones where she wins and wins a big victory on behalf of, well, women, or in some instances, men. She had one client that was a man who was being discriminated on the basis of some law that gave favorability to women. This is fascinating. The Supreme Court said, yes, Idaho's law is in violation of the 14th Amendment. Write it down. It's no good. That law is no good. It's no good. It's a violation of the 14th Amendment. Equal Protection Clause. You can't do that. But notice this. They did create the intermediate scrutiny test, in which they said, hey, state, government, whatever, if the government wants to treat men and women, males and females, differently, they have to have an important government objective. It's a little bit lower than a compelling reason. Understand this. This is why it's easy to remember. Strict scrutiny, oh my gosh, it's going to be really hard for the government to treat people differently on the basis of race. I mean, maybe an affirmative action program will get through, but if you want to try and discriminate against African Americans, forget about it. But in this one, it's intermediate. In other words, some gender discrimination by a government might be seen to be not okay if it doesn't serve an important governmental interest. But some might. We're going to go through these cases to flesh out exactly where things are on the balance. Is there an important governmental objective in saying for this poor dead guy that his stuff goes to just his dad? No. Split it. Right? That's easy. That's an easy one. Does everyone got that? Are there... Let's just start out with this question. Used to be an easy answer, but maybe it's getting a little bit more complex. Is there a difference between males and females? Really? Is there a difference between males and females? Kurt, what's the difference between males and females? For example, what? Oh, there's a muscle mass difference, maybe a height difference and so forth. Anything else? Is that the exclusive thing, right? So, I mean, we can go, for example, take Anna as an example and Gabe as an example and conclude, therefore, that females are tall. No, that's not going to work. So we have to do a larger group sample because you're taller than Gabe. I don't know. That's like, we hate to do this, but yeah, it's like, Ben's like, I'm glad you didn't. Anyway, so it's like, leave me out of this. But it's like, you know, raise your hand if you can identify somebody in this class of the other gender who you could take in a physical match. That's like, oh, leave me out of this. Leave me out of this. Owen, you got your hand up? Can you take any of these guys? All right. Shh. Kurt, we're not done with you. All right? You got the obvious ones, but you're going to need to fess up about this. Kurt, is there any other physiological differences between males and females? Shh. Wait for it. Really? Have you had health yet? Shh, Lizzie, he doesn't need help. He can do this. Shh. Shh. Okay, Kurt, we'll make it easy. Actually, shh, Kurt, where do humans come from? There we go. Now, are fathers involved? Oops, there we go. We already said a father's involved and so forth, all right? So, but that's an interesting point. Write this down if you didn't know this. Babies are born inside of females. Is that, okay, you got that? Note to self, double check this. I don't know. Mr. Hansen's led us astray a few times in the past, so, yeah. Okay. Is that an important difference justifying the government treating males and females differently in certain contexts? Let's go to the cases. All right, here we go. All right. Here we go. You ready? Write this down. Because this used to be a case when I first started teaching out and so forth. This used to be a case. You ready? Write this down. We'll deal with this fairly quickly. Okay? Once upon a time, in the United States military, women who were allowed to be in the United States military, okay, it's all volunteer military force, and they could perform all variety of different services, but women were denied combat opportunities. That was a decision within the military framework. Now keep in mind, notice there's the answer here, not anymore. President Obama, Commander-in-Chief, he removed that distinction. But before that, let's just make a note of this because this is important for our constitutional analysis. Before that, the United States military, Commander-in-Chief, Bush, Clinton, Bush, Reagan, Carter, etc., they said, yeah, we're not going to have women in like frontline combat positions. And, write this down, the Supreme Court backed up the president on that. They backed up the military on that. Even though you had the Reed versus Reed intermediate scrutiny test and so forth, they applied that and they said, I'm giving you the conclusion, I'm going to ask you guys what the arguments are if you can come up with them. They reached the conclusion that there was an important governmental objective by not having women in combat positions, but by keeping that exclusive to men. You understand that? That was the ruling. The Supreme Court ruled in favor of that. Didn't matter Obama. In his mind, he was thinking, okay, well, that's interesting and so forth, but I'm going to do it this way. And notice it hasn't changed. Trump didn't change that, and Biden hasn't changed it either. So women can serve in combat positions. I'll take a hand from somebody. Give me an argument justifying, if you can, try to, even if you don't agree with it. How did the Supreme Court rule and say it's okay to keep women away from the frontline combat things? Okay, Gabe, go through this. Raise your hand. Shh. Okay, let's look at that. Shh. With respect to a number of different positions in the military and combat and even pre-combat and so forth, this brings up Kurt's point, not about the like where babies come from, but the physical strength differences and so forth. Can, ladies, gentlemen, can women physically perform some of the tasks that are established for men in order to get into the military or into any combat situation? Yes, some, okay? And that's a very important thing because if you're going to need to carry out certain military functions, it is going to be harder for maybe an average woman to do something compared to an average guy, but nevertheless, in order to accomplish that goal, they need to have those there. But that's not going to be good enough because what if you have a female that can do all of those weight, physical requirements? Why then? I need another hand. If you don't have the answer, I'll tell you what it is. Think about it. Try extrapolate in your mind. What can happen in combat? You could get shot and killed. Or, it's up. Hold on, no. Don't get stressed out. It's like, no. Gabe, is it possible that men and women could potentially have psychological stress, either gender? Yeah, no, just like, if you're going to be in combat and so forth and psychological stress is going to get to a point where it could be debilitating for your ability to carry out the job, can that affect men? Can that affect women? Okay, can you get some kind of a measure to identify that and then filter out those people that can't handle it? Yes, okay, so that one's not going to work quite yet. Go ahead. Shh. Well, and here's the deal. How many of you guys, oh, check this out. Shh. Now, don't get, Victoria. You're like, don't hurt the argument. Victoria, on the same point, can the government come up with a test, like almost like an emotional reaction test? Can they do that? Yeah, how many of you guys know some females that are like not emotional? In fact, if you mess with them, they will like, look at you. Yeah, and it's like there's no emotion involved. There's just like, there's going to be some serious retribution going on here and so forth. So, all right. Shh, we haven't hit it yet. Ladies, gentlemen, let's have a quiet, please. Shh. There's something else. I'll give you a clue. Okay? And it's a little bit paternalistic. Okay? And it actually ultimately derives to something Kurt mentioned. Barely. Reluctantly. Shh. Okay, here we go. Understand this. If you're in combat, Max, we're going to send you in combat. You're going to go to the front lines. You have a higher opportunity, if you can call it that, of getting shot and killed or captured. Now, here's the deal. You can make this down. Write down. To be captured by the enemy. Now, there's rules that most countries follow as far as like what they're supposed to do with enemy combatants that are captured. You're supposed to put them in like camp and not mistreat them and so forth, torture them, yada, yada, yada. And yet, sometimes bad stuff happens to prisoners of war. Is it worse if bad stuff happens to a male versus a female, or is there any difference? I will take a hand to give a comment on that. Really, Caden? Go ahead.
Do you not want me
No, I want you to go. You had your hand up first.
Yes, hand up first. Okay. Women are raped more often.
Pause on that. Shh. Pause on that. Now, here, listen to this. Squeamishness. It can happen regardless of gender. And it does happen regardless of gender. But Kurt, back to you because you're the expert. Is there something that could happen as a result of rape to a female that can never happen as a result of rape to a male? That's right. And that could be, you can't get men pregnant. Not yet. I don't know. Some of you guys go into medical and so forth, figure it out. Okay? Is that a basis? Is that in and of itself a basis that instead of like the harm taking place to the male and the female, and they're both very bad and so forth, and you can be all paternalistic like, oh, we're not going to let the women get captured and be raped and so forth and so on. You're like, well, what about the guys that could happen to too? Oh, well, whatever. You're like, hopefully is the case. But in war, bad stuff goes around all over. But here's the deal. You're never going to have a POW who's raped who becomes pregnant. If a female becomes pregnant, then you got a whole nother thing going on. Is that enough of a justification to say that women are that the military can keep women out of combat situations? Perhaps, yes.
Let's think of it this way.
I'm sure that.
If a woman gets raped and she becomes pregnant, like, that's going to cause a lot of psychological damage and like survival things, right? But I feel like also if a dude were to get raped, that would cause a lot of psychological damage. Like,
Oh, they both do.
both for the same reason.
Yeah, I mean, do the research. They both do. Okay, final word.
My beginning point, women are still raped more often.
I mean, you're right.
But it still could
It's
happen.
still happening.
It does happen.
But we have a nice society in America. Oftentimes, other militaries will discriminate a lot more on.
Well, here's the point, Caden. We're not talking about what our military is going to do. The concern is what another military might do, and therefore, to protect females, don't put them in the frontline units. You know, that was the argument.
We'll have a lot more men. It's more likely that the women are getting raped.
So, here we go.
Places like Iran, they don't like the gays.
Okay. All right, here we go. Let's move on, because I want to keep going, because we got some more controversy. Honestly, we got controversy coming up over every bend. All right, here we go. This one's easy for you. Write this down. You ready? Shh. Write this down. Even though the president, Obama, the previous president, in a sense, took away the combat restriction as far as women, The Selective Service Program is still male only. The way that law is, and it's been in effect ever since I was you guys' age. I was one of the first groups of men, young men, that had to sign up for the Selective Service System. Write it down. Selective Service System is like a draft database with everything except for the actual draft. We run in a voluntary military system. You understand that? Females can join the military voluntarily just as males can, but guys have to. You're required by law at age 18 to put your name into the system so that if we ever quickly needed to go to a draft, we would have a lovely database all there with names and ages and addresses and supposed, okay? There's been some debate, and I think I've asked you guys, how many of you guys think that women should also have to have their names in the system? How many of you guys think that women should not have to have their names in the system? Well, I don't think that message has quite gotten to Congress yet. There's been some discussion, but it hasn't changed. But here we go. Write this down. There were 2 young women who brought a lawsuit. It went all the way up to the Supreme Court. And they insisted that they should have to sign up for the Selective Service System. In other words, they said it was a violation of the 14th Amendment. Okay? Okay? That if we ever had to go back to a draft, that those names should be in there as well, females as well as males. Here's the quick answer from the Supreme Court. They ruled against the women. They ruled in favor of whatever president it was in Congress that had created that law, which is still in effect. Along with the issues about, basically it went into, are there important differences? They looked societally, and they saw that although there's changes, more women are heads of household, more women are running the households by themselves and so forth than in the past. Still, primarily, write this down, women carry the vast responsibility of raising children and managing a household, okay? Which is a big thing. It's a huge thing. Just curious. Raise your hand here if your mom is the primary raiser of children in your household. Raise your hand if your dad is the primary. Okay, hands down. Raise your hand if it's even. Raise your hand if the cat is, along with me, but mostly the cat. Anyway, hands down. Okay. So here's the deal, and this is like choices. These are choices and so forth, and so those societal factors still weighed in on the decision by the Supreme Court. They basically were like, we're not going to force a change. If Congress and the president wants to do that along the line, maybe somewhere down the line, they might do that. Israel, where they have a huge need for people, a lot of young people to be involved in the military, they got rid of that distinction a long time ago. Men and women have to serve in the military. You understand that? Okay? All right. So that case, selective service, went through the system. Here, let's go to another one. Ooh, I told you. I told you. Settle down, settle down, settle down. Shh. There's some preliminary information you need to understand. Okay, shh. Settle down, Lizzie, settle down. Shh. Preliminarily, you need to understand this. Okay, because then I'm going to talk about the information you have up here as far as differences between male and female. But mostly this is an age thing. All right? Here's the basic background information. It's called statutory rape. You can write this down so that you don't forget it, in case this actually factors into your thinking on a day-to-day basis. It's called statutory rape when a person wants to have intimate relations with somebody else, and that person, the government says, can't say yes. All right? Let's back it up a little bit. If you got 2 people, 21 years of age, and one's like, let's do it, and the other one's like, no. And then the one does it, and then the other one's like, no. That's rape. Do I need to explain that further? I don't think he does. I think Kurt has got this down. Okay. Yes, he may show a little reticence. Yeah. Back off, Caden. Back down. Stand down. Shh.